Hi everyone, and welcome to the second session of World History, and today we'll be going over essay writing. So this means all the essays that you'll have to do on your World History test, which is the long essay question, the document-based question, and also free response questions. So let's get started. All right, so here's a quick rubric when writing LEQs. We'll start with the long essay questions. Here's a quick rubric. So what you want to do is you want to respond to the prompt with a historically defensible thesis. We'll go over thesis writing more in depth in a couple minutes, but your thesis is the base of your essay. If you don't have a strong thesis, it's going to be hard to write a strong essay. So you want to get that right. The second thing is you want to describe a broader historical context relevant to the prompt, which means not only just vague historical events. You want to have clear details, things that help you prove your point. And you also want to support an argument in response to the prompt using specific and relevant examples of evidence. Same thing as before, you want to use evidence outside of what you're given. Use historical reasoning. We'll go over historical reasoning and sourcing a little bit later, and using your evidence correctly. Okay. So here is the basic outline of an LEQ, or a long essay question. You usually have 4 paragraphs, sometimes 5. So in the first paragraph, you'll have your opening statement. It has a very similar structure to any regular essay. So in the first paragraph, you'll have your opening statement, and then you'll have your contextualization and your thesis. Second paragraph, you'll have your topic sentence, your evidence, and then historic reasoning. And remember last time, during last session, we talked about what historical reasoning is. That would be comparison, causation, continuity, or change over time. You want that next, and then in your third paragraph, you're going to follow the same the same format as the previous one. So you'll have the topic sentence restating the part of your thesis, your evidence, and then your historic reasoning. And then your fourth paragraph, you can have a second, or you can have a third part. You can have a third piece of evidence, or you can just close it off right there. Sometimes people will make three body paragraphs, 3 evidence paragraphs, and then 1 closing paragraph. Sometimes people will have 2. It's entirely dependent on how much evidence you have and how strong you feel your arguments are. Someone asked what grade you do the essays in. So like we went over in the first session, WAP, or World History AP, is usually taken in the sophomore year of high school, or like after freshman year. So about 10th grade is when you will be doing your essays. At the end of your sophomore years, when you'll have your AP exam, that's when you'll have your final essay. Right, so that's the outline of an LEQ. Like I mentioned in the last class, the LEQ is, in my opinion, the hardest part of the AP exam, because you're not given any outside information, you're not given any evidence you can work off of. Everything that you're putting down on paper comes from your brain. All right, so here is an example prompt that we're going to be following through the LEQ writing process. So this prompt says, in the period 600 to 1450 CE, trade networks expanded and economic productive capacity increased. Technological innovations and transfers often contributed to this process. So, like in any usual essay, what you want to do is just cross that out. That's generally not useful. If you do end up using that same phrasing in your essay, it's sort of a red flag, because it shows that you are not able to come up with any of your own material. So you want to focus on this right here. All right. And the prompt says, develop an argument that evaluates the extent to which technological innovations or transfers led to increased economic growth in this period. So now, if you notice, this is it's worded kind of confusing. It's got some big words in it. So what you want to do first is you want to break down the prompt, find out what they're asking you for and what you want your answer to be. So in the Q&A, can anybody tell me what they want you to be writing, what they want you to write about? Can anyone decode this prompt? Anyone? Okay, so nobody's decided to take a stab at it, so I'll just tell you, they want you to talk about innovations and new inventions that that helped countries, areas during this time period grow. So they want, how did these inventions, these innovations cause economic success? Yes, that's correct. Someone said, how did innovations lead to increased economic growth? That's a pretty straightforward answer, but yes, how did these inventions lead to economic success? All right. So now we're going to look at some acceptable theses for this. Oh, wait, hold on, sorry. So your thesis, like we said before, is the complete base of your essay. You want to have a really strong thesis that shows you really strong argument. So let's read through the first one. And that says, in the period 600 to 1450 CE, the Abbasid Caliph's promotion of science and trade led economic growth by expanding mathematical and geographic knowledge, as well as by encouraging the development of new economic practices such as the use of camels and caravans. So you'll notice that this responds to the prompt with an evaluative claim, and that it also establishes a line of reasoning. And also don't worry about some of these places or some of these names or empires that you might not recognize, because those are definitely things that you'll learn as you go along in the course. So we have our second thesis. In Europe, new commercial and financial practices developed during the late Middle Ages that greatly expanded the economy and prosperity of some regions, such as Renaissance Italy or the cities of the Hanseatic League. So this responds to the prompt with an evaluative claim that also establishes a line of reasoning. Number 3 says, trade in particular grew in the period because of the invention of tools such as the compass. This is a little bit on the line. It's not the best thesis that you could make, but it is a thesis, and it's acceptable, but it won't gain you the best possible points. Here are some examples of unacceptable theses. So the first one, technological advances and transfers often contributed to increased economic growth in the period between 600 and 1450 CE. So this is a good claim, it's a strong claim, but it has no outside evidence. All you've done here is just rephrased the prompt, and that's definitely not what the graders want. Another one says, technological innovations in the period 600 to 1450 completely transformed the agricultural economies of the previous period into commercial economies. This is not an acceptable thesis because it is a lie. So they did not completely transform the agricultural economies, and because you're providing historically inaccurate information, it's not a good thesis to base the rest of your essay off of. All right, the third one says, between 600 and 1450 CE, many important technologies spread from one Eurasian region to another via the Silk Road. So this could be relevant to the prompt. It doesn't reference any specific technology, it doesn't reference any specific effect on economic growth. In short, it doesn't answer the question. It might give information that's somehow related, but it doesn't answer the question clearly and concisely. For the last one, so during this period, great changes occurred because of the invention of the compass. This, as you can see, it has no clear link to trade, no clear link to economic growth. It just basically says changes occurred because of the compass. But what we want to know is the economic changes and the developments that occurred because of the invention of the compass. All right. And now let's talk about contextualizations. I find contextualizations to be a little bit tricky when you're first starting off writing your LEQs. So let's go and look at some examples right here, and then we can talk a little bit more about how to write your contextualization. So this one says, the Crusades, for example, despite being a religious and political conflict, also made it possible for scientific knowledge and new technologies to be exchanged between the Muslim world of the Eastern Mediterranean and the Christian world of Western Europe. This relates broader events, developments in the topic, and it gives you something specific. And then the second one says, in Eurasia, the period 600 to 1450 was one of greatly increased connections between regions caused in large part by the spread of religions. This also relates broader events and developments to the topic, and these two are acceptable contextualizations. All right, and these are examples of unacceptable contextualizations. The Crusades were one of the most significant historical developments in this period. It's relevant, it's true, but it doesn't provide any relation to what the actual prompt is. It does not tell you how that affected economic growth. It does not talk about technology, and therefore it doesn't answer the question, and it's not a good contextualization. The other one says, in Mesoamerica, the Maya developed highly sophisticated mathematical and astronomical knowledge to use in performing the religious ceremonies. That's also probably relevant, but it has, again, no link to technology or economic growth. All right, someone asked, what is Mesoamerica? Mesoamerica would be South America, Central America, that sort of area. Don't worry if you don't recognize like the places or the people or significant events and things like that. This is definitely some knowledge that will come after you do take the course. Your first essay will probably be closer to the end of the first period that you learn, so don't worry about the historical content part of it. This is just about essay writing and how to structure your essays. All right. This is an example of a statement that counts towards earning 1 point for evidence. So now we're on to evidence, and we'll tell you what specific things count as good evidence. So we have, one innovation that encouraged economic growth during this period was the practice of merchants carrying letters of credit instead of cash. So this counts towards earning the point because there is specific historical example relevant to the prompt. So you can, here you see merchants carrying letters of credit instead of cash. That shows you specific historical example, and it's relevant to the prompt because not only does it talk about economic growth, it also addresses the technology aspect. Great. This is an example of something that does not earn the point. During the period 600 to 1450 CE, economic growth occurred because of the expansion of trade networks and the rise in economic productive capacity. Here, you have no specific information. You're not giving any specific events, any people, anything specific like that. It's very broad, very vague, and does not answer the question because it's the same as the prompt. All right. And now for the second point, you want to use specific historical evidence to support an argument regarding the extent to which technological innovations or transfers led to increased economic growth in the period from 600 to 1450 CE. You'll notice that there's a lot of the phrase from 600 to 1450 CE. In my essays, I don't necessarily like using the time periods. I like saying the names of the periods, like early modern era, late modern era, contemporary era. I just find that helpful, and it's just a lot less clunky. All right. So this person wrote, maritime trade was one area of increased economic growth that greatly benefited from technological innovations and transfers in this period. In both the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean, economic growth received a boost from the increased volume of trade resulting from the expanded use of astrolabes, compasses, lateen sails, originally developed in the dhows of the Indian Ocean, stern-post rudders, and overall sturdier ship designs. You see here they've used many specific pieces of evidence, explained for some of them even the origin, and they're all in an accurate context, and they all answer the question. All right. Now for historical reasoning. So responses will earn 1 point by using a historical reasoning skill to frame or structure arguments about the extent to which technological innovations or transfers led to increased economic growth. To earn this point, the response must demonstrate the use of historical reasoning, to frame or structure the argument, although the reasoning may be uneven, imbalanced, or inconsistent. But obviously the uneven, imbalanced, or inconsistent might not earn you a point, and it's not necessarily the best option. You want to strive for the best possible historical reasoning. All right, so this is a couple examples of historical reasoning. As we talked before, this includes continuities, changes over time, etc. So this says, explaining how technological innovations or transfers led directly to economic growth by making production of and or trade in goods faster, cheaper, or more efficient. This is a very specific answer. It talks about the broad context of things, talks about economics, talks about inventions, and so it would be a good opportunity for historical reasoning. Another one says, explaining how technological innovations or transfers led indirectly to economic growth by increasing demand for goods, freeing up labor supply, or concentrating producers and consumers in cities. This also gives a specific reason, it gives a connection to economy, and it gives a connection to technology. All right. Responses earn 2 points by demonstrating a complex understanding of the prompt and of the topic you are writing. So complexity is usually a point that a lot of people will not really receive in some of their early essays. This does take a little bit of a while to develop, so don't worry if you don't earn this point in your first few essays. But to demonstrate the complex understanding, you want to give specific details, specific events. The point is to give as many examples as possible and to explain them as well as possible. All right, examples of complexity. So here you can see a couple examples of what people are looking for when they're looking for complexity. Explaining the nuance of an issue by analyzing multiple variables or by considering diverse or alternative perspectives or evidence, such as constructing an argument that discusses technology as one factor, affecting economic growth in that period, among other factors like political change, spread of religions, or environmental processes. That's a good example because it goes into not only what is specified in the prompt, but to other things that might affect it while still staying on topic. All right. So here's another example of complexity. They have qualifying or modifying the main argument of the essay to demonstrate awareness of historical complexity, such as constructing an argument that explains how technological innovations of transfers, which usually lead to increased economic growth, may, in some cases or circumstances, have negative or unintended economic consequences. This talks about soil erosion, salinization in heavily cultivated areas of the Mediterranean, inflationary effects of paper money in Song and Yuan China. So these are very, very important points to consider when you're trying to gain the complexity point for your essays. Here's another example, which says, explaining relevant and insightful connections across time and space, such as explaining why the economic effects of technological innovations and transfers during the period 600 to 1450 CE were smaller and more limited in scope compared to the economic effects of technological innovations and transfer in the period after 1450 CE. So this not only goes into some of the specifics, it also talks about effects that might that the specific problem might have in periods after, or causes that it might have had before. This is a good example of complexity. All right. So now let's talk about DBQs, or document-based questions. Of the two long essays that you have to write, I find this one a lot easier because you're given material to work with, and generally it's a lot more enjoyable. So let's move on. So I'll give you a minute to look at this rubric. This is only part of the rubric. They've got two parts to it. The first one talks about thesis or claim. All they want you to do is respond to the prompt with a historically defensible thesis or claim. The second one says contextualization. You have to describe a broader historical context relevant to the prompt. And then evidence. You have to talk about evidence from the documents, things you'll find by reading the documents. Don't worry, I'll show you an example of a DBQ in just a minute, and you'll have a chance to take a look through the documents, practice some of your own theses. And then you have the evidence beyond the documents, where you have to use at least one additional piece of evidence beyond the specific historical evidence. So while you can't completely use, you can't just use only the stuff that you find in the documents you're looking for. You have to take some of your own historical knowledge and put it in, but it shouldn't be that hard because most of your content will be coming from the documents that you're analyzing. All right, so our first step in writing a DBQ is analyzing the prompt. So most prompts will test one of the following historical reasoning skills, which is causation, continuity, change over time, or comparison. So you want to look for keywords in the prompt that indicate which skill is being tested. For instance, if they say changes, that often indicates continuity and change over time, and phrases like transformed or led to indicate causation. So keep that skill and your historical reasoning skills in your mind as you read the documents and consider organizing your essay according to the skills. Then you want to use the 15-minute reading period. This is specifically during your test. They give you a 15-minute reading period, and use that to read documents and organize them into groups for analysis. So feel free to write notes in the test booklet and underline important words in both the source lines and the documents themselves. Nothing in the booklet is read as part of the essay scoring, so don't worry about your note-taking. Reading the documents and grouping them is a very, very important part because not all the documents will have the same point of view on an event or subject, so you want to group them by, all right, these people agree with this point of view, these people disagree, and you want to use them accordingly to prove your point. For each document, jot down brief notes to help you solidify your understanding of it. So use your notes to make your plan and write your essay. Take short notes about main ideas of the source, the purpose of the source, and the background of the author and/or context in which the source was created. We actually have an acronym for that, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. So thinking about these factors will help you address several DBQ requirements. Then you should reread the prompt thinking about how each of the documents relates to the prompt. Group the documents by similarities. Maybe they present two or more major viewpoints or causes or types of changes. So when you plan the organization of your essay, each group may correspond with one body paragraph. So if the 15-minute reading period is passed and you need a few more minutes to review the documents and organize your thoughts, absolutely go ahead. 15 minutes is only a suggested amount of time, and that said, you will want to give yourself as much time as possible to write a thoughtful response, so do be a little bit careful with how much time you're spending on reading and analysis of your prompt and documents. All right, so planning. Planning is a very important part of essay writing, especially in your DBQs. So making a careful plan can help ensure that you address all the scoring requirements. So first, you want to paraphrase your thesis statement. Knowing your claim will make it easier for you to plan an effective argument in your essay. In light of the documents, you have to make a claim that demonstrates a line of reasoning in response to the prompt. Avoid statements that are really vague or general, like the Industrial Revolution was very significant, and make a specific claim that responds to the prompt using both the documents and your historical knowledge that will set up the rest of the essay and provide as a basis. So instead of saying the Industrial Revolution was very significant, you might want to say like, the Industrial Revolution not only resulted in new capitalist economies, but also brought about fundamental rights and social structures by creating new social classes and new roles for women. So be sure that your thesis or overall plan incorporates a complex understanding. You need to demonstrate that you have more than just a basic understanding of the concept, so your essay should address the complexity of the historical development, maybe by including multiple variables, by considering both causes and effects, or by making an insightful connection to another time period. Then you want to make a note about how you will provide context for the topic of the prompt. This may fit well into the introduction or the first body paragraph. So make a simple outline of your body paragraphs. Likely there will be one paragraph for each point that you've made in your thesis. For instance, in the Industrial Revolution example that I just said, there would be a paragraph each about changes in economies, social classes, and roles for women. For each paragraph, consider the scoring requirements, which one of them says, list the documents that you will use as evidence. Remember that you must use 6 or 7 to earn the maximum number of points for using the documents. Sometimes you'll have, I think you usually have about 9 documents. Using 6 or 7 will give you the best number of points and the best evidence. Then what you want to do is consider whether the paragraph is a good place to provide additional evidence. So you have to include at least one additional historical example. You don't want to use just the information they've given you in the documents. That doesn't show very much flexibility, very much knowledge of the topic. So you definitely want to bring evidence beyond the documents. The last thing you want to do is think about when it would be beneficial to explain sourcing or how a document's context or situation is relevant to the argument. So you must source at least 3 documents. We'll go over sourcing in just a little bit. We have an acronym for that called HIPP. And then finally, review your plan and check off each requirement in your test booklet or on a piece of paper and make sure that you've addressed all the requirements. All right. Now for writing the response. So here's a quick outline for writing your DBQ responses. So the first paragraph, like the LEQ, should have an opening statement and contextualization and a thesis. Second paragraph, topic sentence without a topic sentence that restates your thesis, evidence with documents, historical reasoning, and then sourcing. Third paragraph, topic sentence restating the second part of your thesis, evidence with documents and sourcing, historic reasoning. Fourth paragraph, usually in a DBQ, you'll have a 5-paragraph essay, which means you'll have 3 body paragraphs that have content and evidence. So in this one, you might have topic sentence restating the third part of your thesis, evidence with sourcing, historic reasoning, evidence beyond the documents, and then your 5th paragraph would just be a quick closing statement. Unlike a lot of regular essays that you'll write for English, the conclusion in a world history essay is not necessarily as important. It's just very simple. You just restate your thesis. All right, first of all, your thesis. So the thesis sets the tone for the whole essay. Oh, sorry. Nothing is more important in the first paragraph than the clear statement of an analytical thesis. It clearly outlines the arguments the essay will defend, and without a strong thesis, like it says right here, you cannot have a strong essay. How do you create a strong thesis? Follow these 3 steps. So the first thing you want to do is establish a historically defensible claim. A historical defensible claim just means that what you present in your thesis is historically accurate, and it's just accurate information, correct information, and it's not false. It's not anything false. You must make a claim or an argument, and this claim or argument is what you'll be supporting or defending throughout your whole essay. So if your claim or argument is not historically accurate, you're not going to be able to find any historically accurate evidence, and you're not going to be able to support it with historical evidence. The next thing you want to do is you want to establish a line of reasoning. A line of reasoning is just the reasons you present to support your argument or claim. Any good thesis will make a historically defensible claim or argument. So a line of reasoning is basically what are your reasons for making this historically defensible claim or argument. So typically each of the reasons you provide in your thesis will be addressed in a body paragraph. So you have 3 reasons in your thesis, you'll likely have 3 body paragraphs, 2 reasons in a thesis, 2 body paragraphs, sort of, etc., etc. So the line of reasoning lets the exam reader know what your body paragraphs will be about. The last thing you want to do is evaluate your prompt. The prompt will ask you to evaluate an extent of historical development. Your thesis has to clearly state your evaluation of the extent of the historical development. One way to think about it, like it says here, is to what degree did the development influence the time period provided in the prompt? All right, now on to sourcing. Now that you finished with the thesis, what you want to do is you want to learn about sourcing and how to properly source a document. So this is a quick acronym that's really, really helpful when you're doing sourcing. It's HIPP, and H stands for historical context, I for intended audience, P for purpose, the second P is for point of view. So these are the 4 things that you will want to address when you're doing sourcing. You just need to pick one, you don't need to do all 4 of them. Sometimes one of the 4 will fit a document more than another, and it'll be a lot easier to work with that way. So for H, historical context, you talk about what's the time period, if there's a war going on, what's going on, if there's specific events going on, if there's the Industrial Revolution at this time. You want to talk about basically the context of the document. I says the intended audience. Who is the document being written to? If it's a letter to the king, you have to talk about this is the king's stance on this. It's a letter to the king, so it's probably trying to convince them to that. P says purpose. This also goes in tandem with both intended audience and point of view. So you'll talk about why is this document being written? What was the purpose of it being written? What's the purpose of it being made? Point of view is who created the document? Is it someone who is supportive of this issue or someone who is not supportive of the issue? And all you have to do for sourcing a document is just choose one of the four and you should be fine. You don't need to do all four, just choose one. Alright, so now let's look at some documents and we're just gonna have a little bit of some sourcing practice. Alright, let me share. Alright, so this is an example of a actual AP World History free response with with the document-based questions. So the question says, evaluate the extent to which the Portuguese transformed maritime trade in the Indian Ocean in the 16th century. So they will often give you just a map just to show the locations, just a quick reference map. This does not count as one of your documents. Do not use it as one of your documents. It's just for your reference and to help you write your essay. All right, so this first document, we'll go ahead and source the first document, advice given in 1500 by the Muslim merchants of Calicut to the Hindu ruler of Calicut concerning the arrival of the second Portuguese expedition, etc., etc. So I'll give you just a quick minute and you can go ahead and tell me in the Q&A which of the HIPP you would use to source this document, and if you'd like, you can go ahead and source it and I'll tell you how you did. Please try your best on this. I know we just learned it, but just think about which of the four would be the best option, and if you want to, completely optional, if you want to try to draft a little sourcing. In the meantime, I will write one of my own. Right. Just anyone else? I've gotten only one answer so far. It's all right. Just go ahead, take a stab at it. Someone raised their hand. Do you have an answer? I'll allow you to talk. No? All right. Okay. So I only got one answer, and that someone said document one says P point of view. That's, of course, there are many ways you could go with it, but what I went with was also point of view. And what I said was, hold on. What I said was that the Muslim merchants are aiming to convince the king to deal with the Portuguese in a way that benefits their trade and benefits their economy. So that's something that you might want to put into your essay, and you might want to use it as a precursor, or you can even put it after your evidence from the document. Let's try a different one. Let's try document 7. Just quickly answer which of the 4 HIPP, which of them is the best option. Just go ahead, it's just pick one of the 4, tell me which one do you think would be the best option to source this photo. Okay, someone answered historical context. Yes, that is usually the best option. I know I said it's very flexible. You could pretty much use any one but for images, for pictures that they give you, using historical context is probably the easiest because they don't give you any context other than that. And it's easier to say, oh, this was the time when this was made. This is what the picture shows, rather than saying this is the purpose of the box, or the historical context gives you the easiest way out, and it's generally the best option. All right. Let's try another one. One last one, and then we can go on in the presentation. What we're doing right now is we are attempting to source these documents, basically say which of the 4 historical context, intended audience, purpose, or point of view would be the best to provide more reasoning for these documents. Right now we're working on document number 5, the one that's being shared right now. All right, I'll put the 4 in the chat really quick so you guys can have it for reference. So H is historical context. I is intend, oh, hold on. That did not send. Audience. P stands for purpose. P is for point of view. So you can look at that for reference. I'll give you about until 4:45 and then we can, just 1 more minute, and then we can continue. All right, so it's 4:45. Let me take a look. I got 2 answers. I got intended audience and purpose. Both would absolutely work. One that wouldn't work is historical context. Although historical context may be really good for image documents, it is not good for the text, for like the letters and things like that. You just won't get much information from it, and it's not very helpful when you're trying to write your essay. So yes, purpose and intended audience would both work. All right, back to this. So now here is a quick example of a DBQ. You can go ahead and read through this. There's a key in the corner. So here they have their contextualization and thesis statement. I've separated this into a few different slides, but first we'll look at their contextualization and thesis statement. I'm not going to read the whole thing out. You can take a quick look at it. You see how their contextualization is very long. Length does not necessarily equal a point that you earn, but you can tell by reading it that they've provided concise information. They have provided things that are relevant to the prompt and would therefore be a good fit for this essay, and that would earn the point. This response got a total score of a 7 out of 7, which means 100%. And this is the best possible score that you could get on your DBQ. So this is a very good example. Notice here that they talk about more established civilizations and for economic productivity and wealth. The prompt says, evaluate the extent to which the establishment of mercantilism marked a turning point in relations. So they talk about trade, finished goods. They explain the process of mercantilism, which is good for contextualization. They have the establishment of mercantilism. They provide their 3 reasons right here. That's good. It's a solid thesis. It's historically accurate. It fits all the requirements that we explained before. And then we have Then these are their body paragraphs. It says in the red lettering, the historical context. So you want a good amount of historical context, even though it may not be affiliated directly with the document. You still want to display the historical context. You still want to display your evidence. Blue lettering right here. This is the sourcing. You notice they have a lot of sourcing material. Look at the items in black. This is very important. It's important in your essay that you include things that are not just stuff you're given in the document, stuff you're given in the prompt. You want to include outside examples. And you see that in the next one, outside examples. So here they talk about Spain establishing their colonies. They talk about the letter in the document specifically. You'll also notice that in these documents, nowhere do they specifically quote the documents. You don't want to quote the documents in your DBQs. It just takes up some time and it's not really necessary. Just giving a brief explanation of what happens is a lot better. All right. So this continues, it talks about, you still have some of your sourcing, historical context. Here they talk about the outside examples. This is their third paragraph. In this case, they've elected to have 3 examples, and they've given solid outside reasoning. See how much outside reasoning they give. The more evidence beyond the documents that you have, it's usually better, because that means you're able to prove your point, make it a lot more clear, make it a lot more of a solid argument. Here is their conclusion. They restate their thesis, and then they talk about synthesis, talk about the relation to the prompt. It's important that you always, in your essays, that you always describe a relation to the prompt, make it clear that this evidence that I'm providing relates to the prompt because of this. It's going to help your scoring a lot. It's going to help it make a lot clearer to the graders that you know what you're talking about, and that your evidence is good evidence for your argument. So I'll go back to the first one. You can take a quick look at that. You can look at the division of the red lettering, the historical context, the sourcing that they have, the general information that they have, their outside examples. All right, so now let's move on to the simplest of the free writing, which is the short answer questions, or the free response questions, SAQs or FRQs. This is definitely, like I said, the easiest part of your free response writing. It doesn't require any super abstract thinking. It doesn't require lots of proving your point, lots of evidence, things like that. Short, maybe 1 paragraph at most. All right, so they are fairly straightforward, and as long as you have historically accurate information, you answer the question, and you stay on topic, you're good to go. Again, like I said before, relating everything back to the prompt or relating everything back to the question is probably the best way to go in any of your writing, and it's especially important in your FRQs or SAQs. As long as you relate your information back to the prompt, as long as you show that yes, there's a connection between my evidence and there's a connection between the question, you should be good to go. All right, so now let's take a look at some real questions, and you can take a jab at answering some of them on your own. This is the DBQs, hold on. All right, here we are. So you can think about A, B, or C, and then I'll give you a couple minutes to do that, and then I'll tell you about the answer that I thought of. Someone said that you are not able to, oh, sorry. Someone said that you're not able to see it. I'll go ahead. Are you able to see the questions now? All right. So A, B, and C are not answer choices, they are questions. So there are 3 different questions that you are supposed to use this passage to answer. So just go ahead, think about what you would write, just give me a brief a brief overview of your of like what an argument would be, how you would structure it. Again, like we said before, don't worry about like if you don't know the content. That will definitely come with learning more of going through the world history course, going through the actual history aspect of it. You'll learn a lot more, and it'll be a lot easier for you to write these essays and these short answer questions. So don't worry at all. Does anyone have any ideas as to what they would write, as to how they would write this? Or just take a look at, all right, just take a look at A and tell me how you would structure your response. Of course, you can always find these prompts on the internet, on the College Board website, whenever you do need them, but I'm just putting this up right now for practice. If anybody has any ideas as to how they would structure this. Structure A specifically. I'll give you another minute to think about it, and then I'll tell you what I thought about it, and then we'll get back to the rest of the presentation. Okay, so I understand that nobody has any ideas. It's all right. You're just learning about this. So A says identify one specific historical example of a cultural exchange between nomads and non-nomads that occurred in the period before 1450. So you want to take a look at this and you want to analyze it. They're talking about Inner and Central Asia, about the major civilizations. For this, I would go with probably the biggest, most prominent one, the Mongols. You'll learn about that in that period as well. And then you would talk about cultural exchanges, how culture passed during invasions. We might talk about Russia, we might talk about China, things like that. But your main idea is to relate it all back to the cultural exchange and the fact that nomads and non-nomads had interactions in the period before 1450. So let's get back to the presentation. All right. So as long as you once you learn the content, when you start writing your essays, as long as you keep practicing, you should be able to get a pretty solid essay. Practice is absolutely essential to writing a good DBQ, LEQ, or SAQ. Without practice, you won't be able to develop your solid arguments. Like, make sure you have the connections that you need to have. It's not something that you can learn overnight. It takes a while and it takes a lot of practice. You can also find plenty of examples and prompts online. For example, AP Central and the College Board has many example prompts. Fiveable has some good resources like we talked about in the last class. And those are always good places to go. Also, another point, When you are looking for practice prompts, always use the 2020 prompts and nothing previously, because 2020 prompts was the first year that used the modern update curriculum. And so you want to keep with that when you're practicing your essays. You don't want to use the wrong curriculum. All right, are there any questions? I will take any questions. No questions at all. Anything. Essay writing is probably one of the hardest parts of the world history AP course, but with plenty of practice, I'm sure you can get through it. I'm sure it won't be hard at all. Someone has a question. Will we be able to find these slides on the website? I'm not entirely sure about that. I think so. I will check and see. You should be able to find this information. This is not necessarily any new information. This is just the basics of writing, and it'll definitely get easier once A, you learn the content for world history, and B, once you have the knowledge, and you'll be able to practice. Okay. I've been told that I think this will be okay, this might be posted on the website. Yes, I think you might be able to access this. All right. And that's about it. Thank you guys for attending, and I will hand it over.